So I can't be too nervous. When I was asked to do this, I didn't know what to do because I've written my own biography, and it's in 3 parts. And the first part is called Land of My Fathers, and it's all about my life from childhood to the time I went to train to college and then to teach in London. The second part is called Land of Hope and Glory. Martin and I had a very exciting youth work in London, and I was teaching there French. And then the last one, I've done 28 chapters of my land in Canada, and that is called Land of My Ancestors, which is it's very different. I can explain why I called it that. Because Land of My Fathers, my home ground in Canada, but then in the French version of the Old Canada, the first line is Au Canada, terre de nos aïeux, which means land of my fathers or land of my ancestors. So I call it land of my ancestors. It's interesting that I started out with land of my fathers and I ended up with land of my fathers. So I don't know what to do. There was so many things in my autobiography. So I've just taken an excerpt from one chapter, which is just for general memories in Wales. And I hope that somebody at least will be able to identify with me when you hear some of these things. There was no television in my childhood or teens, and for that I'll be eternally grateful. Children had to make their own entertainment. In our street, children of all ages used to play together, kick the tin, hide and seek, hopscotch, skipping, or playing with a whip and top. There was real camaraderie, and the children could play safely. Then we would go to the fish and chip shop to eat chips wrapped in newspaper. They always tasted better that way. I suppose we consumed some printing ink in the process, but in the long term I don't appear to have suffered. Most people lived in terraced houses in close proximity to each other, which meant little privacy, but at the same time it created a warm, friendly ambiance. People rarely locked their doors. They freely visited each other, and a cup of tea and a Welsh cake or biscuit would always be offered to anyone who dropped in. Telephones were rare. And so if everyone wanted to visit anyone, there was no other option except to arrive at the home, knock at the door and enter. My home was particularly hospitable, and the kettle was nearly always on the boil to make a proverbial cup of tea that seemed to solve every problem and heartache. Our home was very cosy, but of course we didn't have the creature comforts of today. No fridge, television, electric iron, vacuum cleaner, washing machines or dryers. Monday was washing day, and it took my mother all day to wash and dry the weekly laundry. Everything was hand-washed. Some women owned wringers to extract as much water from the clothes as possible. But I often recall my mother wringing out by hand until they were virtually dry. All the whites used to be put in Reckitt's blue to make sure that they would appear a dazzling white. Then sheets and pillowcases and the tablecloths were starched. Drying clothes outside on the clothes was a real problem, especially when it rained, and Wales had more than its share of that. Tuesday was ironing day, and I remember my mother using heavy cast flat irons that had to be heated on the gas ring and then applied to the clothes. Everything needed ironing, as no polyester or any other synthetic material existed. My mother was a very industrious housewife and meticulously cleaned our house from top to bottom every day. She was very systematic and had a definite routine. This was typical of the other women in our street too. My mother would scrub the tiles of the little entrance porch on her knees, then the doorstep, and finally mop the pavement in front of our house. Every week she cleaned the windows. The ones on the ground level were not difficult to clean, but the windows of the 3 bedrooms upstairs were a great challenge. The windows consisted of 2 panes, and it was possible to lower the top pane and raise the lower pane. So my mother would open the lower part of the window, ease her body out of the window, turn around to face it, and sit on the windowsill with her back to the street. Then she would pull down the lower pane to her thighs so she wouldn't fall. In this way she was able to clean them all. All rugs and carpets had been brushed thoroughly with a hard bristled brush, and sometimes carpets were hung over the clothesline outside, and with the use of a wicker-type paddle, they used to beat the carpet to release all the dirt and dust. It's no wonder at all that obesity was rare among women, because they had so much physical exercise every day. We had no central heating, of course, and we only had a coal fire in our living room, which needed a lot of attention. Lighting it was really difficult, and then had to be fed all the time with coal. The first chore in the morning was to clear out the ashes before making the fire. It needed constant cleaning, and in spite of all the work involved and expensive coal, most of the heat went up the chimney. Fortunately, our living room was quite small, but nevertheless we would huddle as close as possible to the fire. We didn't have an indoor toilet until I was in my teens. So whatever the weather, we would have to go to the very bottom of the garden to the toilet, which was right next to the coal house. I think we were the only ones to have a fancy toilet pan with blue flowers. I don't know where my father found that. So at night, every room had a chamber pot under the bed, which seems so primitive now. But that was a norm in my childhood. The pole was also called the gazunder, because it was under the bed. One of my mother's daily chores was to empty all the chambers into a special pail with a lid, wash and disinfect them, and put them back under each bed. Later on, my father added an extension to our bathroom and was able to install a toilet, which was a real improvement of the situation and great relief. My mother kept strictly to her daily routine. In the morning, she did all the housework. In the afternoon, she went shopping, and always dressed smart, as the shopping was not only a necessity but a social event. My mother would meet lots of other housewives, and they would stop from time to time to have a chat and catch up with the local news. There was no refrigeration, so food was brought daily, and it was always fresh. Any unused milk at the end of the day had to be scalded. Everything had to be carried from the shops to our home. It was about a 15-minute walk to town, and she was always limited to the amount she could carry at one time. However, some entrepreneurs changed their front room into a shop, and almost every street had its own grocery store. Going to the grocer's was a weekly event, and could take quite some time purchasing one's everyday needs. I remember the grocer weighing the sugar, tea, rice, flour, and placing it in brown bags and neatly folded over the top. The grocer would cut a piece of cheese with wire, wrap it in greaseproof paper, weigh it, and then would write the price on the wrapping. One by one, the housewife would ask for various items, and they would be placed in orderly row on the counter. Finally, he would write out every item in duplicate in a special book with the prices on the side, which was in fact the bill. In spite of the complexity and difficulty of the pounds, shillings and pence system, he would calculate the bill in next to no time in his head. No calculators in those days. Each housewife would spend at least 20 minutes going through her grocery list and gave both the grocer and the customer time to chat. This friendly interaction between shopkeeper and customer really ceased to exist at the arrival of those most impersonal supermarkets. The grocer provided a transportation service for his customers if they couldn't carry their produce home. Young schoolboys were able to get a job at the grocer's after school, delivering the groceries using a large, heavy bicycle, which had a huge metal basket on the handlebars to hold the groceries. The baker, fishmonger, croner, potman, and milkman all delivered their goods to our doors. Seafood was a feature of Welsh life. Every week on Saturday morning, the cockle, mussel, and laverbread lady delivered these seafood specialties to our door and went from street to street. She wore a kind of a cotton cap on her head, a huge white apron over her long skirt and blouse, and used to carry an enormous basket on her arm and a small one on her head. Laverbread, which is sometimes called the Welshman's carrier, is a type of seaweed and is served with bacon and eggs for breakfast. Oh, how I miss that. Unfortunately, it's only available in Wales, and it is one delicacy I really miss a lot. Whenever I return to Wales, I always buy about 5 pounds of laverbread, freeze it, place it in a Tupperware container, and smuggle it in my suitcase, and 12 hours later, it is still frozen. I do stop in London first while I'm frozen again. As a child, it was so wonderful to come home from school at 4 o'clock to be welcomed by my mother, who would want to know all that happened in school and had a snack ready for me. I wouldn't change that for anything in the world. No latchkey kids amongst my contemporaries in Wales. We had a wireless and a gramophone player that had to be one for every record. We also had quite a good collection of 10 and 12-inch records of classical music, the Messiah, Persian Market, In the Monastery Garden, and of course, The Laughing Policeman. I remember spending endless hours playing records with my brother Calvin, and we didn't seem to mind winding up the gramophone every time we played a record or frequently changing the needles. The gramophone only had one volume, and it played the records rather loudly. So if we needed to reduce the volume, we had to stuff a duster in a speaker horn. Another memory I treasure is that at 5 o'clock as a family, we sat around the dining table for supper. No eating meals on trays. We used to listen faithfully to Children's Hour on BBC Radio, that then broadcast daily until it was taken off the air in 1964. The demise of Children's Hour was greeted with great sorrow by the generation who had grown up with it. The head of Children's Hour for many years was Derek McCullough. He was also one of the presenters and was known as Uncle Mac. I recall such programs as Toy Town, Said the Cat to the Dog, Norma and Henry Bones Boy Detectives, as well as children's quizzes and panel games. The non-existence of TV in my childhood not only meant that children had to entertain themselves, but people read more, families spent more time together, and there was no lack of communication, at least not in our family. We were not passive TV viewers, but participated in healthy, stimulating conversations and were not allured by the gogglebox. I wouldn't exchange my childhood in Wales for anything.